All right, it's Friday night. This is not a snore stream. I only have like an hour and a half. I got to go to work. Sucks. But we're gonna watch some high level intellectual discussion here. Um, I don't know. We might do this in two parts because if I'm commentating on it, commentating, that's not a word. If I'm doing commentary on it, then anyway, I was listening to this guy on Nick stream rapping. It was all right. What was I just saying? So if I'm stopping and commenting throughout this, I'm not going to be able to finish it all tonight. So we might do it in two parts. But this is deep. I've already pre-watched it. This type of thing that I got to listen to twice because when they get to talking about truth and what truth is and what's real, it's deep. It's the type of thing that like somebody like, Jalen wouldn't understand, or somebody who believes racism exists wouldn't understand what they're saying. But basically what they say is, well, we'll get to it, but Hamlet is more real than I am. Or I don't know, who's a fictional character? Luke Skywalker is more real than I am. More people know about Luke Skywalker than know about me. More people know the life story of Luke Skywalker. They know what he went through. They know his struggles. They know the character arc of this character. He's more real to them than somebody like I am. And so anyway, that's one of the deep parts. And then the other deep part is towards the end. I don't think we'll get to that. But anyway,
there was a debate.
Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic, and Jordan Peterson, I bring to you now. Try to follow. If you're low IQ, it's going to be tough. If you're average American IQ, you're not going to be able to follow this, which is low, by the way. It's just going to sound like gibbery gush, gibbly gush, gibbly gook, gobbledygook. Navigating belief, skepticism, and the afterlife. Alan O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic.
Around the physicality of Jesus' resurrection.
Yes.
So the canonical tradition ends up stipulating that Jesus physically resurrects,
yes.
and you must believe that, otherwise
yes.
you're a heretic.
Yeah, and that's part of the Catholic.
And he's been wearing this jacket a lot. This jacket is fly, boy. This jacket lit. Jordan Peterson always got the most lit jackets.
Particular emphasis on the divinity of the body.
A lot of the Gnostic tradition says that the thing that's being gotten wrong is the idea that there was this literal resurrection.
Right.
No, the kingdom of God is here and now. The resurrection is inside of you.
You'll notice that he focuses a lot on the Gospel of Thomas and the Gnostic Gospels because Alex is doing a whole deep dive into the Gnostic Gospels right now. So in all of his interviews, the last like 3 interviews that Alex has done, he keeps coming back to the Gnostic Gospels and the Gospel of Thomas and stuff like that.
You, and you attain it through gnosis. I mean, the Gospel of Thomas doesn't even mention the resurrection, doesn't mention a crucifixion. It's a list of sayings.
Yeah.
And the very form of that collection shows that these people believed that the thing that's important is not what Jesus did, but what he said.
And we're gonna skip his ads. Jordan Peterson has enough clout and popularity that I don't need to play his ad.
So I'm here today speaking with Alex O'Connor, who's flown in from London. I'm in LA. He's known also as Cosmic Skeptic, and he runs a podcast Within Reason. And so you can subscribe to and listen to that podcast, watch it on YouTube. Alex was recommended to me by a friend of mine, John Vervaeke, who was a professor along with me at the University of Toronto. I've done a lot of different public events with John, many conversations. And Alex has interviewed many of the people that I'm interested in, including Richard Dawkins, and he is very interested in religious matters, although he's not a Christian. And we believed jointly that it would be useful for us to meet and to hash.
Spoiler alert. Well, maybe I shouldn't spoil it. Let's take bets. Who thinks Jordan Peterson cries in this interview? Who says he doesn't cry? Who says he almost cries? And who says... I guess those are the three options.
Hash out our differences in viewpoint and similarities and see if we could get together and move together somewhere valuable and enlightening. And so that's what we're trying to do. That's what we try to do with the conversation. It focuses mostly on the nature of belief, I suppose. That's probably the easiest way to sum it up. What it means to believe something, what it means to have a religious belief, what it means to be committed to a belief. We talk a fair bit about the distinction between, let's say, the distinction between fact and fiction, and the idea that fact reflects the real, but so does fiction. And so, welcome to the discussion of all that.
Looks like he's about to cry
first of
already.
all,
in the
thank
opening.
you for coming here. It's a long way from London. We're in LA, and so that's a long ways. And so, and insofar as you're going to disagree with me, I'm pleased that you're exhausted from the flight, because that'll slow you down and that'll be helpful. So anyways, seriously, thank you for coming. And
Of course.
so let's start with this. Cosmic Skeptic. Right. Okay. So how do you come up with the name, and why the conjunction, and what do you think the advantage is, if any, in relationship to the emphasis on skepticism?
I'll give you the official and the unofficial story. The official story is that cosmic sort of implies universe, space, big thinking, and skeptic sort of situates me within a tradition of people who are interested in interrogating their beliefs to their sort of fundamental grounding, insofar as that's possible. And skeptic is spelt with a K because most of my listeners are American. The unofficial answer is that when I was younger, I knew a guy who was a musician and started a SoundCloud account with the word cosmic in it. And I thought, hey, that sounds like a cool word. And
there have been two really good podcasts. This one and Impulsive had,
because I got it wrong.
I see. Okay.
Impulsive had Cliff Connectly. And I think he watched this interview before his Impulsive interview, because he says a lot of the same things that get said in this interview.
It's an interesting allusion to the combination of revelation and critical thinking that actually makes up actual thinking, right? Because the problem with being concerned with a vast plethora of ideas is that many ideas are misleading and wrong. And so you have to learn how to combine that openness and curiosity with the capacity to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
And that's the utility of skepticism. I mean, it can degenerate into a kind of argumentative.
So this part right here, I think Cliff Connectly watched the beginning of this interview before he went into his Impulsive interview, because he says this exact same thing. He says that skepticism is good, but there's a dangerous level of skepticism as well, where you question everything and the truth could be right in front of your face and you're going to miss it because you're questioning everything. There's no point in just questioning everything if you never have an answer.
Nihilism. That's the downside.
And I think I said that last week.
Properly applied, it separates the wheat from the chaff.
TGIF, Josh, not really. Not for me anymore. This is not the snore stream because my schedule changed, so I have to work. So my Friday is now Monday.
Right, and the purpose of that is to keep the wheat.
Well, skepticism can only ever be essentially destructive because you're being skeptical of something. Somebody's putting something forward and you're sort of responding to that with
What's up,
skepticism.
Matthew?
And so for a lot of people, if skepticism is the thing that you do, then you sort of end up chipping away and ending up with nothing, whereas skepticism is really supposed to be a tool that you use. It is destructive, but in the way that you might sort of carve a piece of marble.
Yeah, right.
You're intending to get a statue out of it at the end.
Yes. Well, that's the thing to always keep in mind is skepticism in the service of something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a tool. It's a methodological tool. It's not a world.
You mentioned too, and so I'm interested in your progression in your thinking in relationship to that, because you mentioned just before we actually went on air that had you come to see me.
Well, we'll be doing the Monday night show. And then after the Monday night show, I'll end the Monday night show, and then I'll start another stream, and I'll do a late night after party Discord stream on Mondays. After the Dreaded Conservative show, we'll go into a Discord after party, and then Tuesday night will be the same kind of thing, just a Discord stream. But I know we're probably going to lose a lot of people because it's not on Friday and Saturday nights anymore. And I'm not going to be able to see the UFC fights anymore. But we don't ever really talk about the UFC fights. So I don't think the conversations or anything is going to change. Worst case scenario, I get to watch more videos and react to the videos because there won't be as many people in the Discord.
A couple of years ago, you might have been more inclined to, I'm putting words in your mouth to some degree, so correct me if I'm wrong, to strive for a victory or to make your point, something like that. And you alluded to the fact that your thinking around that has changed to some degree. I suspect that's probably a consequence of experience. So what's changed?
In part, it might have something to do with becoming a podcaster and speaking weekly to people. And you can't keep up that energy. Or you can, but it becomes totally unwatchable, and nobody wants to engage in that all the time. I think there are times when it's worth doing, and to be clear, I still like to disagree and do so essentially unapologetically and bluntly, and that can still come across as quite rude. But I think that the way that I would think about a conversation is
soft people.
Well, what are we about to do here? A debate. We're about to debate an issue, and I'm going to try to win, and that's. And not even, I mean, maybe there's sort of an element of pride in there. You want to win for that sake. But also you really think, well, I want to win because I think I'm right about this. And if I don't, then, I must have just not expressed myself properly. I think
Or maybe you're wrong.
What I probably meant when I was saying that is that I would have had more of that cap on than now, after having so many conversations with so many people and realizing that not only is it more constructive for myself, I've learned a lot more. And now I'm here like, hey, I might learn something today. That would be great. Even if I just learn something about what your worldview is. But also people listening just unanimously say that they prefer it. It's a much...
Well, the skepticism. So one of the things you learn as a therapist, for example, is that being right is not very helpful, especially when you're trying to help someone, because whether you as the therapist is right has very little to do with the positive outcome for them. You still want to maintain the skepticism. And one of the ways of doing that in the manner that's helpful is that, like, if I'm talking to you and you say something I don't understand, that's the right place to be skeptical, because if I don't understand what you said, well, it might be my ignorance, but it also might be like lack of clarity and
maybe you're
pointedness on your part. And so one of the advantages of disagreeing with someone,
that's like schizophrenic people when they have delusions of grandeur and they'll say stuff that they think is very like deep and like retrospective and well thought out, but then they say it and you're like, you're not saying anything. That doesn't make any sense. That I hear that a lot. I get that a lot. Not about me, but talking to other crazy people. I've talked to a lot of crazy people in my life.
Is to point out to them in a positive way where they're lost in the fog. Because if you're sufficiently lost in the fog, you tend to run into sharp objects, and that's not very pleasant.
Facts.
So, but the skepticism, and this is obviously what you alluded to, I would say, as a consequence of learning from the podcast, is the skepticism should be in service of rectifying your ignorance rather than in service of making your point or winning the argument. Problem with winning a bloody argument is that the victory can
that's true,
seduce
Matthew.
you into...
That's true, Matthew. Internet sleuths are always on the internet. It doesn't matter if it's Friday or Saturday. They're always on the internet. But like producer has to work in the morning on weekdays, so he can't stay on late. But yeah, a lot of internet people are always on the internet. You're right about that. If you can become skeptical, you should ask questions and get answers before you make a decision. Yep. So happy I heard it yesterday. I feel like it was such a good debate, but it needs to be heard multiple times. Nothing was missed.
Thinking that you were correct, and you're never sufficiently correct, right?
Yes.
And so I don't like debates fundamentally. I've never really enjoyed them. I probably, when I was really young,
Yeah.
you know, before I stopped doing this when I was about 23, I
They're
would take a
addicting.
certain amount of pleasure in being able to obtain intellectual victory. You know, it was also a way I defended myself when I was young, and it was effective. But it's not the optimal way to conduct a conversation. This is one of the reasons why people like Rogan are so successful. Because Joe will push his point, but he always does it in the service of learning.
Yes.
He doesn't do it in the service of victory.
Yeah. I think you've probably put your finger on it there. But what you were saying a moment ago about precision, about sort of thinking clearly and understanding somebody else clearly, I think the reason why I'm excited to speak to you today is because you're someone who celebrates being precise in your speech. And I've always appreciated your desire to make sure that you're really understanding what somebody else is saying. I've made attempts in the past my channel is mostly focused on the philosophy of religion.
Yes.
And I've made attempts in the past to try to understand your worldview.
Yeah.
Your
I watched
religious
some
worldview.
of them.
And I made a video essay.
Yeah.
And some of the things I said there, I think, at least one thing in particular, I'd probably think I was wrong about. But what I was trying to do there, I've seen that people would ask you on interviews and podcasts, you know, do you believe in God? Do you think that Christianity is true? And it was sort of, you would sort of struggle to answer the question. And I thought to myself, well,
people come at the question with a priori commitments about what they think truth constitutes.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
There must be something important that's being left out of the sort of precondition of that question or conversation. If it's so unimaginably difficult to answer, you know.
Calm down.
Well, I'll
Ford.
give you an example. I watched that essay this morning, right? And I also wanted to talk to you about your discussion with Dawkins.
Yeah.
So
This guy doesn't like debate because he runs from confrontation. I don't know what video you're watching. I don't know if that's directed at me or Jordan or Alex, but you're wrong on all fronts. Jordan Peterson does do debates and he destroys people. He did a debate with Sam Harris, who was one of the most known atheists, for like 4 nights straight, for like 3 hours every single night, for like 4 nights on a stage in front of hundreds of people. So Alex O'Connor definitely doesn't run from debates. I don't know who you're talking about that, Buff, but I don't know if you know what you're talking about.
people ask me, for example, do you believe in God? And I think, well, I don't know what you are driving at with that question, because I don't know what you mean by believe. Most people, modern people, believe that a belief is a description of accordance with a set of facts.
Sure.
Right. Well, I don't think that's what belief means in the religious sense in the least. So I just think that's a non-starter.
If you something to do with what you act out, right?
Buff definitely
It has
sus.
to do with what you believe is what you're willing to
We're gonna start calling him sus drinks a lot.
die for. Fundamentally, it's what you're committed to or live for. If you think about it as life in the most extensive manner, it's a matter of commitment.
So I understand what you mean in the religious context.
Yeah.
So, but religion is a big topic. Religion is a mighty, you know, area to be talking about. But when I talk about belief in a more mundane sense,
Yeah.
like I believe that this chair exists.
Yeah.
Like that is a belief that I hold. I sort of can't help but hold that belief because I can see it. Right?
Well, that's a place where your
But do you
action
know
and
that
your
it
statements
exists?
align.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is
you
why,
believe in the chair and you're sitting in it. It's like fair enough.
Which is why I totally agree when you say that what you believe might really be what you act out. But I think when people are looking for essentially definitions, and just a second ago you said, well, what is it to believe? And you said, well, what you believe is what you're willing to die for.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to die for my belief that this chair exists.
Maybe.
Maybe in a broad sense.
Maybe.
If not
Hard to
believing,
say,
if not
but
believing that the chair existed required me to sort of give up my trust in my sense data,
Right.
then I might literally die by accident by sort of walking off a cliff because I don't trust my eyes anymore. So it's
Well,
true
it's
in that
also not
sense.
something that you're likely to forego given your role, let's say, as a rational skeptic.
That's right.
Seriously, like it's a commitment that you've made to a certain view of reality.
But you understand surely that when somebody asks, do you believe in God? Although they're asking the sort of subject of the belief is a much more grand entity, the word belief itself, for them, at least in their question, even if you think it's an inappropriate question, they mean something much more mundane. They mean like you believe in the existence
it's
of the
hard
chair.
to know. It's hard to know what people mean. You know, like one of the things I've noticed, for example, is there are no shortage of Christian trolls, right? I mean, there are atheist trolls and there's engineering trolls. There's lots of trolls, but there are Christian trolls. And the Christian trolls, when they ask that question, and it's often the Christian trolls who ask that question, what they mean is, are you in my club?
Exactly.
Right. And my answer is, I'm not even sure you know what club you're in. So there's a trap in the question, which I don't appreciate because I don't like questions that have traps in them.
Yes.
Now, not everybody who's asking that question has a trap, but many people do. And so I find that off-putting, let's say, because it's manipulative. In terms of that descriptive belief, that's something we could go into. I think we should do that because it does get to the core of the matter that you were attempting to untangle.
That's all right, Bob.
Let's say, in your
We're used to it.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of, and I had to sort of piece together different things you'd said in different interviews. And I suppose the reason I had to do that was because I didn't have you in front of me. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity now. It seems to me that when you speak of God, you mean something like that which is at the, I don't know if you'd rather say the basis or the top, but the basis or the top
both metaphors
of a value hierarchy. And it begins with the recognition that anything that anybody does requires some kind of value. Even just to do something as simple as sitting in a chair or picking up a glass.
Well, you don't do anything without it being oriented towards a value.
Exactly, right. And so even to perceive the glass is something you've spoken about before. You know, why do I see the glass as one object? Even though it's got multiple parts, it's got a side and a bottom and top. I see them together in a way that I don't see the cup and the table as one object. Well, you said before, it's because I can grip it. It's sort of functional. It's because I can use this cup. And the reason that I see it in that way is because I can then drink from it. And the reason that I want to do that is because I sort of value my health. And there's sort of a value regress that goes on.
Always.
And more broadly, this comes out in the question of like, you know, why are you writing an essay? To get a good grade. Or why do you want a good grade? To get a good job. Why do you want a good...
Alex is an atheist, and he believes in determinism, scientific determinism, as in he doesn't believe in free will, but he says it's because everything in the universe has a cause, and so everything that happens is due to causality from previous things that have happened that have led to this point. And basically, I agree with him, except instead of science being the cause, God is the cause, or Satan is the cause, good or evil. But I agree with him that there's no free will and that everything has a cause. It's just that the causes are different. I believe that higher spiritual forces, the rulers of the world, the rulers of the heavens, they are the ones controlling things. And we are just puppets. But we're not puppets of science. We're not puppets of evolution. We're puppets of higher beings. And I would like to see Alex O'Connor, because Andrew Wilson said he's been thinking about doing a determinism debate, which is basically a free will debate with somebody. I'd like to see Andrew Wilson debate Alex O'Connor on free will. And then I'd like to see Andrew Wilson debate a Christian who doesn't believe in, like a Calvinist who doesn't believe in free will, and see how he handles both those different perceptions of what free will is. It would be that would be cool to see. Or have three of them on at the same time. Have a Christian who believes in free will, a Christian who doesn't believe in free will, and then an atheist who believes in free will, and an atheist who doesn't believe in free will. Having a 4-panel debate on that would be epic.
Good job to get money, and you keep going back and back. It has to terminate somewhere.
That's right.
Because otherwise there would be nothing to sort of lend that value
Well, otherwise you'd always be in an infinite regress,
further down,
right? You just die of
or it would be
questioning.
infinite. Yeah, you literally it's the kind of regress in which the value that you have for A actually borrows the value from B. You don't value A at all without B. So it doesn't get it without B, and B doesn't get it without C, and C doesn't get it without D. So if that went on infinitely, there's nothing to give the entire sequence value in the first place.
Right.
And so there's got to be something at the basis here. And then you said, at least on one occasion, that we'll call that place, whatever's at the top there, we'll call it the divine place.
Yeah,
and you said we'll make that
a matter of definition. Yeah.
Now, I'm fine with this.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that what you're doing is you're giving a definition of God that makes him
partial definition,
or makes it him, whatever, unavoidably exist, and also makes it a quite different entity to the entity described by a great deal of, for instance, your Christian listeners, who will say that God is not the basis of a value hierarchy. God is an omnipotent, omniscient, agential being with consciousness that intentionally brings about human beings and sent down a physical man to sacrifice his life in order to save us from our sins. Now, that means that when someone asks you, does God exist? And you say, well, look, I think that's almost an inappropriate question. At times you sort of imply that you don't even believe in atheists because you sort of act as if you believe in God. If what you mean by God is just...
Well, Dawkins himself admitted he was a cultural Christian.
That's another matter, because that's much more specific. I mean, that's cultural Christianity, right? This is just... But
it's a reflection of the same problem.
But you know, when a Christian says to you, I'm being very clear that that's what I mean by God. I don't know if you do believe in the omniscient, omnipotent, agential being, but... If you start talking about the inevitability of believing in some basis of a value hierarchy,
not so obvious.
You're talking about something different.
Obvious from the traditional Judeo-Christian perspective that God is properly conceptualized as a being.
That's probably right.
Well, so it's tricky, right? Because one of the ways that you can approach God traditionally is in relationship to a being, but that's a veil. So why do I say that? Okay, so
that's like when God says he made man in his image. So we think that God looks like us. But in the Gospel of Thomas, somebody asked Thomas, where are you from? And Thomas answers, we are from the light. So somebody said, Thomas, where are you from? And he said, we are from the light. Or maybe that wasn't in the Gospel of Thomas, but it's somewhere. Anyway, but he says, we are from the light. Where are you from? If somebody asked me, where are you from? You'd say, Florida. Or you'd say, but the right answer for a Christian would be, we are from the light. Because being made in God's image is not being made to, because we all look different. So does God look like me? Or does God look like you? Or does God look like you? No, God is the light and we are the light. That's the image of God that we're made in.
So let's speak about it religiously first, and then we can speak about it conceptually. So there's a tremendous insistence in the Judeo-Christian tradition that God is outside of the categorical structure, right? Like seriously outside. Elijah, the prophet, establishes that God is not in nature. He's not in the earthquake. He's not in the conflagration. He's not in the storm, right? So that doesn't mean that nature doesn't speak of God, but it does mean that whatever God is not in the natural world. Okay, now we can extend that. Not bound by time, not bound by space. Well, does that make God a material object? Because when people say, is God real, which is a variant of the question, is do you believe in God? It's like, well, God's immaterial and outside of time and space. So if your definition of real is...
That's why when Jalen asked me in that debate, he said, because I said racism doesn't exist. And then he said, well, does God exist? And I said, God doesn't exist. God is existence. You can't ask, does a concept exist? It doesn't make sense. Does God exist? Does a belief, does a being that's outside of time and space and reality and controls everything, do they exist? No, they are existence. We exist, but God doesn't exist. God is existence. And concepts don't exist. Ideas don't exist. It's interesting when they get into numbers or things? What's more real, numbers or things? And so it's not a simple question of what exists and what's real.
Material things in the domain of time and space, then we're not talking about the same thing. Now, usually people approach that question of belief with some materialistic framework like that in mind, even if they don't know it.
Yes.
The Christians, let's say, who put this question forward in the hope of getting the answer they want to hear, are materialistic and enlightenment minds, even though they don't know it, because they have an implicit definition of what constitutes real. Is God real? It's like, no, God's hyper real. That's not the same thing.
I think that the physicality of
I do
God is an
too
interesting
sometimes.
question.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament tradition, it seems to evolve as far as I can see. If you look at some of the earlier descriptions of God, you've got a God who walks through the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
You've got a God who has a council of angels and the accuser. You have a sort of, it's being at least conceptualized as a much more physical being. And as time goes on, God becomes...
It gets real interesting when they start talking about, did the Exodus really happen? Did the Egyptians really wander through the desert to escape the Pharaoh and blah, blah, blah. And at one point, Jordan says they're still walking through the desert. There's basically that whether it physically happened or not doesn't matter, because it's always happening. It's a perpetual story. All the stories in the Bible are constantly happening to everybody. So it doesn't matter if Samson really pulled down the pillars and fell to the woman and she took his strength. It doesn't matter if that physical story actually happened, because that trope constantly happens all around us throughout the world, and it's still happening today. So yes, it's real. Even if it really didn't happen, doesn't matter, because it's always happening.
less localized. And I've heard a lot of theories as to why that's the case. I've just done an episode on my own show.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true exactly. I don't think there's a clear historical progression like that. There is a...
Where did God come from is an ignorant question, Buff. To ask where God came from, or when did God come about. God is above where and when. God is outside of where and when. So that's like an ignorant question.
a constant tension between God as ineffable and then God as manifest in a manner that's comprehensible, right? And if so, Mircea Eliade mapped the consequences of this out to some degree. So he was very interested in Nietzsche's proposition that God had died. Most people, including Nietzsche, regarded that as like a unique historical event. There was a religious tradition, the Enlightenment arose. In consequence, we became skeptical about God. And in 1850, the philosophers decided that he was no longer necessary or real. But Eliade, who is a brilliant historian of religions, has noted that this has happened many, many times, that God has vanished, disappeared. And one of his explanations for that is that a God that's too ineffable, so that's completely outside of the categories of time and space, let's say, and who doesn't make himself present as a being.
That's what omnipresent means. He was always there. He was always everywhere. So you can't say where is God, when was God, because God always was, and he's everywhere, in everything.
Who doesn't have a heavenly council, who has no hierarchy between the pinnacle and earth itself.
It'd be like saying, when did math start? Or when did numbers start? Well, somebody invented numbers and they came up with these symbols to represent numbers. But if there's two trees sitting there, there's two trees sitting there, always. So numbers always existed.
Tends to float off into space. It becomes so abstract that
even if there was nobody there to say that there's one tree, two trees, but there's two trees and there's nobody around, there's still two trees.
You can't
Yes.
have a relationship with it,
But
him, and then he disappears.
In many ways, this is what Christianity provides with the New Testament and the figure of Jesus. And that's why I think for a lot of Christians, the more important question for you and the question that they're interested in, and you're quite right that a lot of people are like, I want to get you on my team.
Yeah.
I have no dog in this fight. I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
But I know that a lot of Christians are frustrated when they begin asking about Jesus, who's a much more physical entity, right? It's a real
You don't have
human
any
being.
faith.
It's someone of flesh and blood. It's someone who's physically crucified by the
It's a
Romans.
very different question. It's a very different question.
And then,
You put
and then
your
is
faith in
seen
science.
as a physical entity.
You put your faith in science, you're just inconsistent with your beliefs. And I've proven that you're inconsistent with your beliefs. If you put your faith in science and evolution, well, evolutionarily, and they'll talk about this later, what's wrong with throwing your baby in the trash heap like the Romans did because your country's too overpopulated? You don't need as many kids anymore, so you just start throwing your baby in the trash heap. Evolutionarily, that's the best thing to do. That's what you should do. But you can't tell me why that's wrong, because from your worldview, if you're being consistent, that's the right thing to do.
See, at least according to the canonical tradition, by his disciples after he died.
Yeah.
So when somebody asks you, do you believe that that happened? And when I've seen you ask about that question, you tend to still speak in terms of the psychological and the mythological. I think the frustration is that, as you've just said,
That, I don't mind
conversations,
frustrating
right?
Christians in that regard either, because the truth of the matter is, with regard to the gospel accounts, that the mythological and the historical are inextricably cross-contaminated.
Sure.
There's no pulling out the historical Jesus, right? That's a non-starter. And why that is, I don't know. It's very mysterious. It's very hard to understand, as are the, let's say, the accounts of the resurrection. Okay, so what do I think about that? Well, I think that denying the historical reality of Christ I think that's just a fool's errand.
Of course.
I don't know why
it's
anybody
dumb.
would bother with it.
So a man exists called Jesus.
Nobody
We get
does that,
Now,
except for really dumb people.
Now, there's a claim that is attributed to Christ that he is the embodiment or the incarnation, the fulfillment, let's say, of the prophet and the laws.
Yes.
I think that's true.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What does that mean? Well, I think it's in the Gospel of John. I think Gospel of John closes with a statement that's something like, if all the books that were ever written were written about the gospel accounts, that wouldn't be enough books to explain what had happened.
Yeah, if all the things that Jesus did.
Yeah. And there's a truth in that. The truth is that profound religious account is bottomless. And the biblical representations are like that. There's no limit to the amount of investigation they can bear, not least because the text itself is deeply cross-referenced. So there's an innumerable number of paths through it. It's like
cross-referencing books that were written 1,000 years earlier from somebody 2 countries away, before they had cars and internet and telephones. They were still saying the same exact things in different languages, in different places, different people all over the world saying the same things, who have never met each other. They've never heard of each other. They can't call each other on the phone. They're saying the same exact things, and they're referencing the other people who were before them. And then they make prophecies about the future that come true. And then those prophecies reference the previous prophecies, and they're in no way connected. Or they're connected, but they're not physically connected. They've never met each other.
like a chessboard. And so
most of them are illiterate. They can't read
inexhaustible in
another
its
language from
interpretive
1,000
space.
years
That's true.
before.
And that's a problem too, because it means it's also susceptible to multiple interpretations, including potentially competing.
I know, that is
I
a
think
tight
a lot of people
jacket.
interpret Paul, for example, the earliest New Testament source, as saying that if Jesus did not literally rise from the dead, if there was not a man who stopped breathing and then started breathing again, then your faith is futile and you're still in your sins. That is, Christianity is undermined. Now, that means that, and Paul doesn't say sort of believing that that's false is really bad. He says, if you do not believe this proactively, then your faith is futile.
That's the problem I have with that.
If you don't proactively believe that yourself, then I think when a Christian asks you, do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus? Are you a Christian? I think you must be committed to saying no, at least under that interpretation of Paul. And even if you're not sure, I mean, it's fine if I say to you, do you think that a man physically rose from the dead? And you say something like, well, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there, but I think it has a lot of mythological significance, or I think that maybe it happened in a different sense, or it happened in the sense that good fiction happens. You know,
So this is like, I think they touch on it, but they don't say one thing that I want to add. But eventually they get into doubting Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas. I've heard that when they called him doubting Thomas, that was a polemic, which is basically a text that's written to discredit a previous text. So when they call him doubting Thomas, it's to discredit the fact that Thomas was by some called the twin, Thomas the twin, Thomas of Didymus, the twin who was of the twin. And the idea is that Thomas was literally Jesus's twin brother. And that in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says 3 words to Thomas, and he comes back and they say, "What did he tell you?" And he said, "If I said any of the 3 words that he told me, you'd kill me for being a heretic." And so some scholars have said what the words Jesus possibly could have told Thomas, because why would you get killed for being a heretic? Well, there's like three reasons, and 2 of them don't apply. One of them is being blasphemous. So what are 3 words Jesus could have said to Thomas that could have been blasphemous? And in Hebrew, some scholars have said that what Jesus told Thomas was, "You are me," or "I am you." You are me, or I am you. Basically, if Jesus said, "I am you" to Thomas, and Thomas came back and told them Jesus said, "I am you," Thomas the twin, that they're essentially the same person. But then that discredits the virgin story of Mary only having Jesus, if Thomas was really Jesus's twin. But the broader meaning is that Jesus is saying we are all, if you're a follower of Christ, and you're a son of the Father, we are Jesus. I am you. You are me. And that was heretical back then. So Thomas couldn't even tell them what Jesus said to him. But the idea that he was doubting Thomas when Jesus says, "You can put your hands in my side and you can feel that this is real. You can feel the holes if you want, Thomas." What the Bible, in when Jesus does that, the Bible never says that Thomas did it. It never says that Thomas put his hands in Jesus' side. I know a lot of Bible schools and Christians will teach that, but it doesn't say that in the Bible. When Jesus says, "Come on, feel the spear hole. You can put your hand in there." It doesn't say that Thomas ever does it. So some people say that the idea that Thomas was doubting Thomas was actually like a dig against Thomas because they didn't want Thomas's stuff to get out there. It's just interesting.
then fine, but it needs to begin with that caveat of the simple sort of, historically speaking, I don't know. And I know you don't like to pull out the historical Jesus from the mythological,
that's a good objection.
but it's an important question
That
to
too.
ask.
No, of course, it's a very good objection.
Thomas was very pro-woman.
So I just did a seminar on the Gospels with a crew of about 8 people, and it was the same crew that walked through Exodus with me with a couple of variations. And we spent a lot of time on the resurrection accounts, for example. And of course, that was the toughest, let's say, that was the toughest morsel to chew and digest. The thing about the resurrection accounts is that they're all, look.
It doesn't correlate with the canon gospel, Matthew. There's a lot of stuff in the Gospel of Thomas that is just weird. That I'm sure the transgender community loves the Gospel of Thomas because it basically says that women need to become men, and that men and women are actually not the same. And if you see genders, then you're not really a Christian, basically. Christians shouldn't see gender. Christians should see us all as the light. Which I'm not really on board with that stuff. I believe in the order of God, God over Christ, Christ over man, man over woman, and that men are supposed to lead the women. More of a patriarchal belief, which patriarchy means of the father. And the Gospel of Thomas is really has some weird stuff in it about basically there's no difference between a man and a woman, um, which I'm not really a fan of that, and that's not um, there's a lot of contradictory stuff to the canon Gospels in Thomas.
So I could say something like this, which will just annoy people, but it doesn't matter. I believe the accounts, but I have no idea what they mean.
When you say
You
you
see?
believe the accounts, do you mean, and I hate to be sort of
Yeah.
pedantic here, it seems pedantic, but do you mean you believe that these are things that happened such that if
That's
now,
a strange
I know you don't
thing.
like that.
I didn't say it was about transgenderism. I said the transgenders would love the Gospel of Thomas because they could use it in that way.
Let me put it this
Yeah.
way. If I went back in time with a Panasonic video camera and put that camera in front of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, would the little LCD screen show a man walk out of that tomb?
I would suspect yes.
So that to me seems like a belief in the historical event of the resurrection, or at least of Jesus leaving the tomb, which means that when somebody says, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? It doesn't seem clear to me why you're not able to just say, it would seem to me yes.
People rise from the
Because
dead
I
all
have
the
no
time.
idea what that means. And neither did the people who saw it.
It's called NDE, near-death
Have you ever
experiences.
browsed in incognito
They're
mode?
pretty frequent.
Fun fact, it's probably not as incognito online as incognito case. Press bestmarknito.com.
Yeah.
Okay, so people will say, well, do you believe that happened literally, historically? It's like, well, yes, I believe that. It's okay. Okay, what do you mean by that? That you believe that? Exactly.
Yeah.
So you tell me you're there in the way that you described.
Right.
And
What do you
what
see?
are the fish
What do you
doing
see? Yeah.
exactly? And the answer is you
Yes.
don't know. You have no notion about it at all. You have no theory about it.
Sure.
So your belief is, what's your belief exactly?
Well, I think a Christian might say something like, my belief is that I have no idea looking at those.
Also, considering when and where the Bible was written, or those Gospels were written, it would make more sense. No, wait, never mind. I was gonna say, never mind. Yeah, it's understandable why they would keep the Gospel of Thomas out of there. But in the Gospels, there's a lot of women who, the women are the first ones that find Jesus, and then they come and report back and tell it. They left that in there, which kind of proves it to be true, because why would they leave that in there in that time and place when nobody was okay with that? But they did leave it in there.
Those fish, what I would see in the process of them being converted into enough food for the 5,000 to eat. I have no idea what I would see, but I do know that what I would see is the fish end up being spread amongst the 5,000. In the same way,
Buff, their heart stops. There's no brain activity. And then they come back to life. I did a whole segment on this like years ago. There's been many cases of people whose hearts stop, no brain activity, they're pronounced dead, and then they come back to life. We call it a near-death experience because, well, they're alive now, but really they died. Physically, they died. Medically, they died. And then they come back to life. It happens not frequently, but it happens. It's pretty common thing. It's a well-known, well-studied thing. There's a group at Duke that has studied it deeply, and they've got reports from people of coming up out of their body and walking down the hall and seeing things that there's no way they could know about, and then they come back to their body and they come up and they say, hey, there's a lady with a red shirt down the hallway, and there is a lady with a red shirt down the hallway, and there's no way they could know that. That is a near-death experience, but they did die. They were physically dead, and then they rose and they come back to life. So it's not that crazy. Also, if the biggest miracle is the creation, if the creation happened and Jesus rose from the dead, then every other miracle in the Bible is easily possible. Like, wait, and even the atheists will say, if you give us one miracle, then we can give you the rest of the history of the universe. And what's that one miracle? How it all began. If you give us that miracle, and they don't want to acknowledge that that miracle could be done by an all-powerful God easily, but they won't say that, but they still want the miracle to explain evolution and explain everything else. They still need that one miracle, but they won't call it God. And all we do is say, we'll give you that miracle. We're just going to call that miracle God. And then they'll say, that's God of the gaps. Yeah, but we don't have gaps. You have gaps. We have an explanation for the gaps. You have gaps. You need a miracle. We're giving you the miracle, and we're explaining the source of the miracle. And if that miracle's possible, then Moses parting the Red Sea is easy.
Right.
Like if I opened up the water jar, what would I see when the water became wine? I have no idea. Does it sort of blend from one color into another? Does it suddenly snap? Does it disappear and then reappear? I don't know.
Right.
But what I do know as a Christian is that I would see something at some event in which when I look at the beginning, it's water, and when I look at the end, it's wine. And I mean actually. I don't mean that Jesus turning water into wine is some kind of, inextricably mythological story, and the question of whether it happened sort of doesn't matter, or maybe it happened in a meta manner, or maybe it happened in a hyper reality sense. No, I would be, as a Christian, committed to saying that it happened historically.
I'm more inclined, rather than to believe, I'm more inclined to understand. And then when I hit the limits of my understanding, I think, I don't understand that. Now, do I believe it or not believe it? I think often, especially with regards to biblical matters, let's say, I have a suspension of belief and disbelief.
Yeah, and that's fine too.
I think part of the reason that I've been able to be an effective interpreter of the biblical texts, and a relatively scientific interpreter, is because I approach the texts with respect, the same respect that I would approach a lab animal. It's like, I don't know what this is. Like, I seriously don't know. And I'm not going to come at it with axiomatic assumptions that are unquestionable. I'm going to try to see what's right in front of my eyes. I'm going to try to see what mystery reveals itself if I take this phenomenon seriously. This is one of the things that I find puzzling, for example, about Dawkins, because Dawkins formulated the idea of meme, which is, by the way, the same idea as archetype. It's exactly the same idea, except he just stopped. It's like, okay, there are memes, they're selected for. Okay, selected on what basis exactly? Does that mean there's a hierarchy of memes? Are the memes more likely?
He doesn't mean internet memes. He's not talking about internet memes. I forget what what Dawkins said the definition of meme was, but it's not. He's not talking about when we do meme review. That's not what he's talking about.
Are the memes that are conserved more likely to be, what would you say, viable organisms? And if they're viable organisms, are they microcosms?
This is really interesting in terms of the survivability, because there's a point, I've spoken to Richard Dawkins, well, a number of times, but twice on my podcast. And the second time, somebody pointed out to me that there might be a point of agreement between you two that has been overlooked, which is that, I don't know if you've ever come across the evolutionary argument against naturalism, or the argument from reason, the idea that
Dawkins' definition of meme is something that well, it actually is kind of like the meme reviews. So it's something that conveys the idea of a unit of cultural transmission or a unit of imitation. So memes is actually a good name for the funny things you see on the internet. Those are memes. They're talking about, it's conveying the idea of a cultural transmission or a unit of imitation.
If you're a materialist, you can't trust your reasonable faculties. So Alvin Plantinga formulated this very well, very, very geniusly, I think, in saying that if you believe that evolution by natural selection happens materially, what does natural selection select for? Survivability. So if you're a materialist, that means that the very rational faculty that you're using right now evolved not to be sensitive to truth, but to survivability.
Yes, that's right.
And if that's the case, well,
definitely.
Why do you believe in the truth of evolution? Well, because you've been rationally convinced of it. But the thing that you've just assented to, the belief itself has just undercut the process by which you came to that belief.
Look, there's a whole, the New England pragmatists figured this out in like 1880.
Yeah, now I think this is a fascinating, I think it really is just
It is.
It's exciting, it's novel.
That's for sure.
And
That's
so
for sure.
I asked,
It's actually a point where Darwin and Newton do not come together.
how do you mean?
Well, the Darwinian definition of true and the Newtonian definition of true
exactly.
are
Right.
not the same
here's
thing.
the thing. Here's the thing. You had a conversation with Sam Harris.
Yeah.
You've had a number, but
Yeah,
one of them,
yeah.
I don't think it was a live event. I think it was before that. You're talking about truth.
Yeah,
And
that
you're
was a very
trying to-
awkward second talk I had with him. I was extremely ill.
It was, do you know, it was awkward to listen to because it felt very much like, and I remember at the time thinking, you know, what is this Jordan Peterson talking about? Like truth is like Darwinian, truth is about like survivability. What do you mean? Truth is true.
True the way an arrow flies.
Yeah, right. And
right.
now I asked Richard Dawkins about the evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Yeah.
I said, well, how can you know that what you believe is true? And he said, because believing true things makes me more likely to survive.
Hey,
I-
boy,
and I
watch
didn't-
where you go with
I
that.
didn't catch it at the time, but I thought to myself afterwards, it was one of my commenters on Patreon actually had mentioned this. He was listening to Richard, and I said, okay, maybe, but sometimes it's at least possible that something that's false helps you to survive. You know, the rustling in the bushes, believing that that's a lion every time or a tiger, even if it's not, that helps you to survive because that one time that it is, you're still going to run away, and it costs you nothing to run away when it's not a tiger. So believing it's a tiger, even when it's not, is going to help me to survive.
That's why we have a negativity bias.
Yeah, and Dawkins says, well, yeah, of course there are some circumstances where believing something false could be beneficial to survival. And I said, well, how do you know that 2 + 2 = 4 is not one of those? And it seemed as though he was just saying that believing that would not be advantageous to our survival, which might well be true. But if that's the case, then suddenly I'm listening to what you're saying about truth being more sort of Darwinian and related to survivability. And I think maybe you two would agree there. And then I think, well, why is it that when you sit down with Richard Dawkins, you find it difficult to have a conversation with each other? And
Well, I think it's partly because we don't know each other very well.
that's
Right.
also
And so,
probably true.
and also, there are things he knows that I don't know.
Yeah.
And Dawkins is just hard to listen to. He's just, yeah. So why do you think that way? Yes. Yeah. He just the way he sounds so old. I can't listen to Dawkins. I was trying to listen to Matt Dillahunty, Sam Harris, and Dawkins had a conversation. 3 atheists, 3 of the biggest atheists, and it's just tough to listen to. I can listen to Sam Harris. I can't stand Matt Dillahunty, but I can listen to him. But Dawkins is, it's the most boring thing you'll ever listen to. It's rough.
And there are things I know that he doesn't know. Now, I would say in my defense that what would you say? I'm more of aware of the things he knows that I don't know than he is of the things I know that he doesn't know.
What?
Right? So, for example, as far as I can tell, Dawkins doesn't know anything about the Jungian tradition of literary interpretation. And that actually, if you're going to talk about religion, that's actually a fatal flaw, right? So, and, you know, he's called me, for example, drunk on symbols. It's like, well, the imagination is a biological function. And it has a structure and a purpose. And it has its own logos, its own intelligible order. And if you're not aware of that order, that doesn't make me drunk on symbols. It just means you don't know what you're talking about.
Now that frustration that you appeal to there when you hear Richard Dawkins, I think Terry Eagleton said
Like
that
Buff.
listening to Dawkins on theology is like listening to somebody write a book about biology whose only knowledge of the subject is having once read the Great British Book of Birds. And okay, fair enough.
But that actually turns out to be a real problem. And it's a problem with regards even to the meme idea, because you don't have to extend Dawkins' work very far to understand that religious stories are memes.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a hierarchy of memes, and some of them are very functional.
But then here's the thing, like that frustration that you're sort of throwing in that direction, I think people throw towards you when you say, well, religion, you don't have to look very far to see that religion is a meme. Well, without further clarification, and of course there's going to be it, you can understand why to somebody first listening, that sounds almost atheistic, or religion is a meme. No,
right?
Religion is not a true historical account of, you know, the history of the universe.
It's not a true historical account.
It's a meme. Now, when you say that the resurrection of Jesus.
Well, what does it mean historically that the Spirit of God brooded upon the primordial waters? Like, what does that mean historically?
Well,
no one knows
I
what
agree.
that means historically.
I don't think
Right.
that at least most of Genesis or parts of Genesis are supposed to be. I mean, the Bible is a library, right? It's not a book, and that means that it's going to contain different genres.
You see how like so Jordan gets very aggressive sometimes, and he'll lean forward, and when he really wants to like get something into it, and you see how it makes his guest almost a little uncomfortable. I've seen this in a lot of Jordan Peters interviews. Watch how Jordan leans forward and Alex repositions the way he's sitting. A little body language study for you guys.
To be. I don't
historic
think.
orders. Like, what does that mean historically?
Well,
no one knows
I
what
agree.
that means historically.
I don't think
Right.
that at least.
See, he sent it's almost like he sends a force into him, and it makes his guest a little uncomfortable, and he has to reposition.
Most of Genesis or parts of Genesis are supposed to be. I mean, the Bible is a library, right? It's not a book, and that means that it's going to contain different genres.
That's for sure.
And so when I
Yeah,
read
and some of them are more historically accurate, and some of them
Yep.
tilt more towards
Metaphor.
that kind of elusive. I don't mean elusive in the. I mean ALLUSIV.
allusive, yeah, sure.
Right. That elusive and symbolic form that characterizes
So-
Genesis 1.
So
sure.
because there are different genres here, it depends on what story we're talking about. And I think
That's
that
for
what,
sure.
what I often observe you doing is we might talk about Christianity, and if you aren't comfortable committing to a historical ideal, you'll start talking about the spirit moving over the face of the waters, which is obviously a much more mythological ideal,
Mhm.
and not quite equivocating them, but moving between them too quickly and not delineating them enough. So if I asked you,
Because
do you
it can
think
be
that the
literal
spirit
or
moved across the face of the
metaphorical. It
waters,
doesn't
and you
matter.
said to me something like, "I think it's still happening."
Right.
I'd
That
say,
is what I would
I'd say,
say.
hey, fair
Yeah.
enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It always
However,
happens.
when
It happened at the beginning of time, and it's always happening.
when somebody
Yeah.
says, "Did the Exodus story happen? Did
Mhm.
did the Jews enslaved in Egypt break free of their slavery and move to the Promised Land across the desert for 40 years?
Mhm.
Did that happen?"
Mhm.
You have also said,
It's still
of
happening.
the Exodus specifically, it's still happening.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, to me, that's far more inappropriate than saying that the spirit is still moving across the face of the waters.
The
Because I
Jews
think
aren't
what people
still
mean there is,
traveling
do
through
you
the
believe
desert looking
that
for a
these
home.
people in that time period
happening right
actually
now.
did this in such a way that, for instance, might show up in an archaeological report?
Well, I think
What's
that,
Israel,
I think that's
Palestine?
the simplest answer to that is probably.
Sure, and that's
Right.
fine too. But then,
But we don't know.
But then-
I mean, there is, like, to the degree that there's been archaeological investigations into the kinds of biblical
They're
narratives
still
that
in the
you've
desert.
described,
They're still
the
fighting.
archaeological evidence tends to fall on the side of historical accuracy in
Yeah.
relationship to
It
the
seems
Bible.
pretty
quite
accurate to
surprisingly
me.
I mean,
often.
clearly, you're. I mean, you spent more time in Exodus than probably any person I've ever met in person, right? Clearly, the story sort of captivates you, and you think it's really important,
Like
and
Elijah
can,
would.
No,
can
it's
teach us a
remarkable.
lot, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
What does that
It's
even mean?
infinitely deep
But-
story.
I think most people speaking to you already know that you think that, right?
Mhm.
And so when they ask you a question, when they suddenly say to you, "But do you think it really happened?"
Well, what the hell does that mean?
You must know that what they mean is what I was talking about a second ago, which is that sort of.
What? Okay, so fine. So it's easy just to turn this
Again,
around. It's
it's-
like, okay, what exactly happened
I don't know what that means.
in your historical account when Moses encountered the burning bush?
I don't need to know exactly what happened. What I need to know is
I'm
that
not asking you
I know,
specifically or
What-
attacking you for that.
What I
I'm
need
just,
to know is that if I sort of went to the Egyptian desert at sort of the time that this story is alleged to have
So
taken
same question
place
you
in
asked
history,
about the resurrection.
would I see a
Right.
mass movement?
If you had a
of
video
Israelites
camera and you
from
went there,
Egypt
would
into
you
the
be able to
Promised Land?
record
Would
it
I see
happen?
people with feet walking through the desert, leaving footprints?
well, let's
Yeah.
take it apart rationally. So
But you also understand that when someone's asking that, and you like, even if you don't like the question, you must understand what someone's
oh
asking.
yes,
there.
well,
But how is that crazy to believe that that happened? Like, I think you would see that.
If that's
I
the case,
understand many of the things that they're doing
then
simultaneously.
you must also understand that when you then say it's still happening,
Yeah.
people just go, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, well, I would say that's not my problem.
But it becomes a problem when you understand that someone's asking a quite banal historical question.
Yeah, but you don't get to do that
But why not?
because the stories that you're dealing with aren't banal.
I agree, but like one.
So you can't reduce them to something
One
banal, even if it's what would you call it? Even if it's reassuring. This actually happened. Well, then what do you do with the burning bush?
So
this actually happened.
One comparison I would make is between this and talking about fiction more broadly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you got it right earlier. I would say you noted that the stories in the biblical library leap across genres.
Yes.
Right. Well, we know this because sometimes they're poetry and sometimes they're song. Yeah, exactly.
Buff, you're doing what low IQ trolls do in chats. You can't follow what they're saying, so you're just commenting on a fake Elijah Wood. He looks like Jim from Harry Nodder, blue suit. This is like basically what you're saying is you can't follow the conversation. You're lost. So you're just talking about what the guys in the chair look like. It's kind of also, why are you commenting so much on what guys look like? It's kind of weird, but kind of sus drinks a lot.
Exactly. And so in any given story, there's going to be historical account plus mythological overlay.
Yeah.
And, you have to be a discriminating reader to kind of see what's different. And you don't just get to say, well, all the mythological symbolism is historical reality.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's not.
But here's the thing, for example. So like,
oh, look at that flower on that table. Well, that flower on that table. Oh, look at those little fake pine cones. I bet you that's a fake plant. I bet you that plant is fake over there. Where are they at? What are they, in a hotel lobby? Oh, man. I bet you that's not even a real plant. It's a fake. Look at his blue jacket. Maybe he needs to button his top button. Bruh. Just say you can't follow what they're talking about. And your brain is wandering and you're just like scatterbrain looking at everything on the screen.
take a piece of trivial fiction like Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Right? We say like, okay, did that happen? Now, I think that what you'd probably say is something like,
I'm entertaining
I don't think the events
chat.
literally occurred. I think that they obviously get at something
you are the
that's
chat
sort of perennially
right now.
true about human nature.
Exactly.
But then suppose I said
that's
to you,
right.
but
So
hold on,
they happened to, they existed as a
You are the chat, and I am entertaining your lunacy.
pattern.
But there's a scene in Forrest Gump when I think he meets the president. Is it JFK at the time? I think he goes and meets John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And so I said to you, well, is JFK the like that specific part of that story? Is it true that JFK was the president?
Right.
And you would probably just say, yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say anything more complicated. And even though the subject as a whole of like, is Forrest Gump true? Is Hamlet true? That's a complicated question.
Very.
But specifically, when I say, but interestingly, there's this
Forrest Gump is more real than I am.
In this broader discussion, do you think that JFK was actually the president? You would say yes.
Why do you think it matters to people? Like, I don't know. These are ancient accounts. Let's
maybe
say
that's
of the
biggest
Exodus.
problem. Maybe that's the biggest problem that you have with the people who are asking these
It
questions.
is. It's
And
like, what point are you trying to make here?
So
the point is, I know what the point usually is the people who are asking the question believe that true unerringly means objectively happened in history, like the things that we're seeing right now happen.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no,
So
that's not how. That's not what those stories are like.
For me,
Some of it is, but
for a Christian, when asking you that, it's probably because for them they have an understanding of Christianity that requires believing in that kind of truth. For me,
yeah, no, that is
and the reason why
it.
I hope that like me asking these questions will be less frustrating to you is because
I'm going to make a short out of this next
I have
part
no desire for that. I don't care about that. I'm genuinely just interested in what you think.
Yeah,
and so
understood.
my desire to know whether you think Exodus historically happened goes no further than a point of interest about your beliefs.
Well, so there's elements of especially the setup to the Exodus story that strike me as very, very plausible historically.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the
Pharaoh had a bunch of
Jews,
slaves.
Before the Pharaoh of that time, were under the guidance and protection of Joseph and the previous Pharaoh. And they regarded the Israelites as benefactors because Joseph had helped save the kingdom and his people were welcome. But that was forgotten. And so the new Pharaoh and the new Egyptians regard the appallingly successful Jews
as bad guys.
Destructive interlopers.
And that's still happening. That's still happening today. If I was a Jew, I'd always be saying they hate us because they ain't us. It's like, you're too successful. You own everything. You run America. Like, what are you saying? You wish you were rich and powerful? Like, you wish that you were successful in every venture that you went into? You're mad at them because they're the best at what they do? It's kind of a weird reason to hate somebody. Seems like jealousy woes, jealousy. Maybe you hate them because they're God's chosen people.
It's like, well, can you believe that? It happens all the time.
Sure.
It's happening right now.
So
it's
it
very
sounds to me that
plausible.
in this particular case, saying it's very plausible, it's like saying something like, well, yeah, it could have happened. I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
So when
I don't think anybody knows.
So when somebody asks, did the Exodus really happen? That word "really," when they say, like, if I just said
really is the crux.
If I said, did the Exodus happen? And I'd understand why you would then say, well, you've got to understand what kind of story this is. Fine.
Yes.
But then if somebody says, yeah, but did it really happen?
Well, which parts of it?
Even if they're not expressing it very well, like what they're getting at there is they're trying to emphasize the historicity. They're trying to say, yeah, but did it historically happen? Probably is what they mean by the word "really" there.
Right. But the thing is, it speaks of their, see, they have the problem is that Christians who ask that have a metaphysics that's not Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a non-starter, the question. It's like, you're asking me the question a materialist atheist would ask. And you want me to give you an answer that bolsters your faith, but the presumptions of your question are Enlightenment atheistic. So it's like, I don't know how to play that game.
So do you think that to be a Christian, you don't need to believe in the historicity of the Exodus or the resurrection of Jesus, for example?
Well, I think those are separate issues, actually.
Okay, yeah, that's probably right as well. And interesting, I spent, last night, it was a bit of a time delay, so it feels like longer, but last night I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. I said, I'm speaking to Jordan Peterson tomorrow. I was thinking, how can I prepare for this? And we ended up, my friend Sheehan's his name, we ended up having a conversation about whether Hamlet is a real person, right? And that was probably better preparation than anything else I could have done.
Yeah,
what I realized
that's a good
that,
question.
So take, if somebody asks, was Hamlet a real person? Sort of naively, I say, have you heard of the story Hamlet? Oh no, is that a real person?
Right.
I would say no. However, there is a sense in which, and I'm trying to understand what you're saying here.
Yeah.
There is a sense in which there are a lot of characters, infinitely many characters that Shakespeare never wrote about.
Yeah.
Right? Those characters seem to exist less than Hamlet does.
Yeah.
Even if Hamlet exists less than Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor do in the
Hamlet might
real
exist
world, right?
more
than
me
and you.
Well, okay. One of the things
you, but not me.
One of the things you pointed to in the analysis that you did of a talk I had with John.
See how he leaned forward again, and then Alex had to take a sip of his water.
Jonathan Pajot is my
and
somewhat
Jordan,
tongue-in-cheek comment that God is.
And I think Jordan picks up on that, and that's why he sits back. Because when he leans forward, you almost see a discomfort in the guest. So then he leans forward, Alex picks up his glass of water, and then Jordan sits back again. And he smiles more in his interviews now because, or maybe he just likes Alex more than like Destiny, for example. When he had Destiny on, I think he's making a conscious effort to smile more and to be more kind, because he can get kind of serious and like, I don't know. I'm just watching the body language.
The ultimate fictional character.
Yes.
Right, which I think is a hilarious line, by the way.
Yeah.
But
by the way, I think I misunderstood. Now that I've watching that back, that's the thing I say. I think I might have misunderstood. I think
character is my somewhat tongue-in-cheek comment that God is the ultimate fictional character.
Yes.
Right, which I think is a hilarious line, by the way.
Yeah.
But
by the way, I think I misunderstood. Now that I've watching that back, that's the thing I say. I think I might have misunderstood. And maybe that's what you were about to tell me. I shouldn't interrupt.
Let's walk through that.
Yeah,
because people see, and this is part of this underlying materialist, atheist, Enlightenment ethos. People think that fiction and fact are opposites. It's like, no, they're not.
Okay.
Not at all. Okay, so let's use an analogy to begin with. What's more real, things or numbers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I'm not going to make a case for either of those positions. I'm just saying that's an actual question.
Yeah.
You talk to mathematicians, they think, well, numbers are way more real than things. Things are evanescent. They disappear. They flash in and out of existence. Numbers are permanent.
Yeah.
And then you could think about it biologically. It's like, well, how useful is numeracy to survival?
Yeah.
Like very, right? When you become numerate, you're powerful in a way that the mere grip you have on the individual facts doesn't afford at all. So there are forms of abstraction that are clearly more real than the things from which they're abstracted, or at least as real. I would say more real because they're so powerful. Well, fiction is an abstraction.
Sure.
Right? And so did Hamlet exist? It's like Hamlet is the pattern of character that existed in multiple people over a very long period of time. And so Hamlet is an abstraction, like Raskolnikov in
Like
Crime and
racism.
Punishment. Did Raskolnikov exist? It's like Raskolnikov existed in the soul of every Russian from like 1850 to 1990.
Sure.
Right. And so is it real? It's like, it's hyper real.
Yeah.
Fiction is hyper real.
It's a meta truth.
It's hyper real, but it doesn't exist.
Exactly. Now, is that real? Well,
when someone says, is that, if they've listened to what you've just said and understood it, then if they
So he's saying the concept, the abstraction, the idea is hyper real, but it doesn't exist. Hamlet never existed, but he is real.
still ask the question, but is it real? You must understand that what they mean is like,
That's why in the debate with Jalen, when we came up with the premise, does racism exist? When he agreed to that term, I was happy because, of course, a concept doesn't exist, an idea or abstraction doesn't exist. Doesn't mean it's not real, doesn't mean people don't believe it and people don't act a certain way based off of their belief in their concepts and their ideas and the abstractions. They do. So we can see it in people, but it doesn't exist. It's just an idea.
did Aliona Ivanovna get hit in the head with an axe?
right.
Like, yes or no? Did that happen?
Right.
And again, you could still resort to saying, it happened in the heart of every Russian who's ever
right.
thought about
well,
killing
I
their
would say
mother-in-law.
no to that specific
But no,
question.
right?
Right.
No is the
No.
answer. And
Yeah.
so, and we can say no with confidence because we know that Dostoevsky sort of thought this up.
Yeah.
With something like the Egyptians walking through the desert, we can't as confidently say something like, no, that didn't happen. But
Right.
we'd have to be more humble in saying something like, I don't know. But the comparison I made in this video, I put two questions side by side. You were asked by Douglas Murray, did Raskolnikov exist? And you say, well, I think that the events literally didn't happen, but that kind of misses something and there's something more to talk about. And then you're asked,
The pattern is extremely real.
sure. Then you're asked about Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
Did the story of Cain and Abel happen?
Yeah,
And
that's
it's like
better
a
example.
famous, the question, did that happen?
No, they're
begs
not
the question.
synonymous.
If you've got
You're
it, you've got to
wrong,
consider. And you sort of, in a way that it seems strange to me that the ease with which you were able to say of Raskolnikov and Dostoevsky, well, no, that didn't literally happen, of course, but you've got to understand that there's another sense in which we've got to talk about the truth of the story.
Well, the
Someone
Cain and
says-
Abel story is quite complex because you could imagine easily that there was a fratricide at some point in the past that was of sufficient emotional magnitude to have stories aggregate around it, to have an account
Absolutely,
aggregate
right,
around
that's-
it.
that's-
So it's easiest to presume that because why not? It's
Mm-hmm.
perfectly plausible that a primordial murder of that sort happened in the memory of that tribal people and was represented in that manner. Now, as the account, and Iliad has done a very good job of pointing out how this develops too. You could think of Iliad's work on the mythologization of stories as an extension of Dawkins' idea of the meme, because Iliad discusses in great detail how an account mutates to, what would you say, to be maximally memorable across time. So it mutates. You can take, there was a core
Sure.
that's true, let's say in the narrow historical sense, but the account mutates to be optimally adapted to the structure of memory that characterizes.
So see, now Jordan's doing the lean forward thing to make a very deep point, and Alex is getting more comfortable and he's accepting it.
Is the human
And
psyche.
that comes out in
Right.
story, like the story of Cain and Abel.
Right, right. And you get a maximally memorable story. Now, that's a meme. Is it true? That's a hard question because, you see...
I think Cain and Abel probably belongs more on the sort of brooding over the face of the waters category than it does Exodus category, for example. Like, so I think with Cain and Abel,
there's very little detail in it that would make it a specific.
But the same
historical
writer
event.
wrote all of those
I mean,
accounts.
because it's two generic brothers and there's a generic murder. But it's interesting too, because even in the case of a specific fratricide, let's say, that actually happens in the world, well, there's all sorts of principalities involved in the background, right? So, for example, I spent a lot of time looking at Dylan Klebold's accounting of his mental state before shooting up the Columbine High School.
Yeah.
Well,
and this is why if you compare this interview to the Jordan Peterson and Destiny interview, Alex is much more open. I got a lot more respect for Alex O'Connor than somebody like Destiny. Alex is very open to this. He's open and he's listening and he's taking it in and he's really considering what this guy's saying instead of always just being ready with a rebuttal or a retort to come back at him. He's listening and he's taking this all in and he's really considering it. And that's a more respectful person, like somebody who isn't there just to argue, but they're there to listen and they're there to hear what's being said and take it in and really kind of understand it and work with it.
Now, if you read that, it'll make your blood run cold.
Oh, yeah.
He's obviously possessed, whatever that means. Whatever that means.
Well, happy to accept the word possessed.
Well, look what he did.
Knowing in part, don't take this the wrong way, knowing that I'm speaking with you, I'm not going to take that as literally as I would if I was speaking to
well, literal is a very hard thing in a circumstance like that because
I'm happy with the word
Klebold
possessed,
invited something in, and it wasn't pleasant, and it had its way with him, right? And the results, although dreadful, were nowhere near as dreadful as he was hoping they would be, right? It's dark. And is that real? So what happened there? It's like, well, one way of describing it is that, a alienated young man shot up a high school. Another way of representing it, which may be more true, is that it was another, what would you say?
Demon.
Punctuated episode of a cosmic drama that's been going on forever.
That's a really complicated way of saying demon possession.
Fine.
And it isn't obvious to me at all which of those two accounts is more real.
Well, it depends on what specific questions being asked. For example, right now, suppose that you were a witness to this crime and the police pull you into questioning as a witness.
Yeah.
And they say, we're trying to gather information to try and, catch the suspects. So suppose that there's no suicide involved. The suspects at large. Yeah. And they're trying to get your help. And they say, so Dr. Peterson, what happened? And you say, well, I think what happened was the continuation, sort of a punctuation in the long paragraph of the cosmic drama that is our human existence. And the police sort of say,
that's not what we meant.
Okay, but come on, help me out here, man.
Yeah,
really, and I think that's
a
what
level
people are doing with the religious question.
Well, that's a level of analysis problem. So we went back. When we started this discussion, you talked about the infinite regress for purposes for writing an essay, right? So what are you doing when you're writing an essay? You're making
What's up, John Frederick?
Horizontal and curved marks with a pen.
Sure.
Right. Well, right. So, but there is a cosmic tree of events in every micro event, right? And when people, when they're looking for eyewitness testimony, they're asking you for something like the highest possible level of narrow resolution you can manage.
Right. Ian McGilchrist.
What did your senses tell you? Not what did your feelings tell you?
I just spoke with him, and unfortunately, I think we lost about half of the footage, so I'm not sure how much that will be seen in the world. But he brought to my attention. I'm sure he said it was John Ruskin who talked about having you see in the garden, you see like a square, and you think it's like a white square in the garden inexplicably, and then you go a bit closer and you see it's actually a page, it's a book. And then you look a bit closer and you see it's got words on it. And then you take a microscope and you see actually it's got like ridges. Yeah. And then you go a bit closer and you actually see atoms bumping into each other. And you go a bit closer and you see sort of waves and energy. Yeah, right. And he's sort of like, well, which of those is the real thing you saw?
Did you know a baby's heart begins to beat at just 3 weeks?
Yep.
At 5 weeks, that heartbeat can be heard on ultrasound. Twice a week, and saving to.com.
Right? Is the cosmic tree of life. This is Yggdrasil. It's like you have got the quantum level and the atomic level and the molecular level and so forth up to the phenomenal level. That's not where it stops. I started to understand this when I was thinking something very peculiar. This is decades ago. I thought people will go to a museum to look at Elvis Presley's guitar.
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah.
So you can imagine that you have a display case and you have Elvis's guitar in it. And now you take that guitar out, let's say it's a mass-produced guitar, just for the sake of argument, and you replace it with a identical model from the same year.
Yep.
Okay, now, is that Elvis's guitar?
If you think it is.
People will say, and you can think this is so strange, people would say, well, even if I couldn't tell the difference, I would rather look at Elvis's guitar.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, what? Is that some kind of delusion? Like, what the hell's going on here? No, the answer is, this is what Duchamp was on about when I think it was Duchamp, who put the urinal in the art gallery.
Right.
It's right. What he was pointing to, and it was brilliant, was that much of what we perceive
The value we
as
place on it.
concretely real is actually dependent on a hierarchical context that isn't part of the apprehension of the object. So when you go to see Elvis's guitar in a museum, the perception is informed by the context. It's like, well,
This is like when I talked about Kurt Cobain's guitar was valued at $100,000 and it sold for $4 million in auction. It's the value we place on things. And we don't even really know if that's Kurt Cobain's guitar. Whoever bought it doesn't really know that it's Kurt Cobain's guitar. You could have a certificate that says it's Kurt Cobain's guitar. You could do research into it and it could tell you that it's Kurt Cobain's guitar, but you just paid $4 million for a Fender that's worth $20 or, whatever, however much it's worth.
well, you're an Elvis fan and you know a lot about Elvis history and you know that this is Elvis's town and the object itself partakes in that higher order unity. That's the unity that extends off to heaven. Every object partakes in that embeddedness above. Like for the reductionist types, you'd say, well, what's this made of, right? It's like, well,
It's like when they remember the guy duct taped a banana to a wall and people were paying all this money to go see it? Kind of the same idea.
it's molecules and then it's atoms and then it's like quantum whatever the hell
Quantum
exists
woo,
down at the quantum level. That's what this is made of. It's like, wait a second, it's on this table.
What's funny about that banana on a wall, I did the story on the banana taped to the wall a long time ago. And then I did a follow-up story like a year later about how they actually have to replace that banana every week because the banana gets rotten. So it's not even the same banana. Every week they have to put a new banana up there. And when the tape stops sticking, they got to change the tape. So it's not the same tape. It's not the same banana. But the art installment, people still pay all this money to go see it. And then at some point, somebody stole the banana and ate the banana. But then they just put another banana on the wall with another piece of tape. It's crazy.
In this room, it's of this time. That's all this thing too.
Yep.
And that's the higher order conceptualization, but it's just as much part of the object.
Yeah.
And a reductionist view doesn't take that into account, and that's a big problem.
They have an even
I think
shorter
it's
wall
true
life.
that, looking at Ruskin's book, piece of paper, it would be silly to always say, well, what's that in the garden over there? Oh, it's a bunch of atoms bumping into each other.
Right.
That would be ludicrous.
Right. Well,
Sure.
that's also, so back to our discussion of Darwinian utility.
Yes.
It's like, well, it's the wrong level of
But
functional
look,
analysis.
surely it would also be inappropriate to do the opposite. That is like to always think at a higher resolution than people are obviously sort of practically trying to.
Right.
So for example, if I was close enough to see, and I was interested in what paper is made of, and I said, well, what is this? And someone said, oh, it's a white square in the garden.
Yeah.
So, well, that's inappropriate. You've gone
It's
too
not
high.
helpful. Yeah,
You've got to
okay.
focus down, right?
So-
and I feel like where you
So he's saying you can be too shallow, but you can also be too deep. Sometimes if somebody asks you a question, maybe there's a face value answer to the question, that the majority of people would answer, but that's too shallow of an answer. You got to go a little deeper than that to find the real answer. But you could also go too deep. You could break it down too much. So you have to find that happy middle.
You might criticize the reductionist materialist for going too high
Narrow.
a resolution of thought, too narrow.
Yeah.
You go too wide on issues of religious historicity.
Well, you want to hit the target squarely, right? And that's hard. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Christ addresses that to some degree. So his injunction for paying attention properly takes local and distal into account simultaneously. He says, okay, this is what you have to do first of all. You orient yourself. So this is the highest level of orientation, right? So this is the divine orientation. It's the thing at the top of Jacob's ladder. It's the value at the pinnacle of the value hierarchy. You put what's properly highest first and foremost in the theater of your imagination, right? And then you align that with the belief that other people have the same intrinsic value as you and that are a reflection of that infinite value. You start there. Then you pay attention to the moment.
Yes,
right.
Tolstoy wrote about this in his Confession. He was.
We'll go a couple
it's
more
like
minutes,
100
and then I
pages
gotta
long.
go.
You can read it in no time.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It's this wonderful account of essentially him sort of trying to battle with his reason and his faith, and he eventually concludes that he was looking in the wrong place. He was looking amongst intellectuals, and he found that he looked at, I think he quite dismissively called them like the simple people, just your everyday person, the working man, and he found that it was something about sort of, if you take someone who's starving and you bring him and you tell him to sort of take this metal pump and just pump it up and down and don't tell him why, and he does it, then the water starts flowing. It's like you have to actually do the thing, you have to live out the thing, and then you get to see why it works. I understand that. I think that's probably true. He also says, Tolstoy that is, in that same account, that he found that there was an exactly inverse correlation between the specificity of an answer and like the importance of the question. I can tell you exactly how many molecules are in that glass of water, but who cares?
Right, it's not relevant.
And the more the question becomes about, humanity, human life, the important stuff, the less specific the answer necessarily has to become. So I understand that there is a
So you've alluded there to or indicated the relevance of value for perception, right? You nailed it with that observation, because as you pointed out, any phenomena can be analyzed at a multiple levels of the hierarchy that it exists within. Okay, so what makes the choice of level of analysis appropriate? Well, it is something that's akin to Darwinian utility. It's something like that. You can think about it less abstractly, is that you want the level of resolution that gives you maximal functional grip in relationship to your pursuit.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what's your pursuit? Well, two questions. What is your pursuit and what should your pursuit be?
Yeah.
Well, your pursuit's necessarily nested inside a hierarchy of pursuits. And when I said that God is the ultimate pursuit that sits at the apex of the progression of pursuits, that is Jacob's ladder. That's what that's indicating in that vision, is that every act of perception unites earth and heaven.
Yep.
And the perception itself is invisibly dependent on whatever it is you're worshiping.
Well, like here's one problem, right?
So that's very comical.
Because I think I see what you're saying, and I hope, what I tried to do in making that video essay about your religious views, and I suppose I wasn't, the main thing I was trying to do was sort of offer an interpretation, trying to get to grips with it, and I hope that you feel as though at least I'm making an effort here to really try and get what you're thinking at. One problem is that, in the early church, there was a debate around the physicality of Jesus' resurrection.
Yes.
So the canonical tradition ends up stipulating that Jesus physically resurrects, and you
Yes.
must believe that, otherwise
Yes.
you're a heretic.
Yeah, and that's part of the Catholic particular emphasis
Yeah.
on the divinity of the body, which has a real wisdom
Yes.
rather than a disembodied soul.
But you
right?
also have like the Gnostic tradition,
Yeah.
broadly speaking, the Gnostic tradition in
Yeah.
early Christianity that's so popular that Valentinus nearly becomes the Bishop of Rome. He's nearly the Pope.
Yeah.
You know? And there's I talked about this the other day, and I should have looked it up. I can't remember which church father it was that was telling the church community, the early church community, when you go to a new place, don't ask to be taken to the Christian church. Ask to be taken to the Catholic church, because otherwise you might end up in a Gnostic church. It was so popular.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Gnostic tradition says that the thing that's being gotten wrong is the idea that there was this literal resurrection.
Right.
No, the kingdom of God is here and now. The resurrection is inside of you, and you attain it through gnosis. I mean, the Gospel
Yeah.
of Thomas, which is probably the most famous non-canonical
Yeah.
gospel, and could have been written at the same time as like the Gospel of John. This is an
Yeah.
early text. Doesn't even mention the resurrection. Doesn't mention a crucifixion. It's a list of sayings.
Yeah.
And the very form of that book, as one scholar whose name I've forgotten, unfortunately, has pointed out, of that collection shows that these people believed that the thing that's important is not what Jesus did, but what he said. The thing that's important is the knowledge. The thing that's
Yeah,
important,
right.
And so this resurrection stuff sort of doesn't matter. Now the thing
Yeah.
is, in that early church community, somebody who said, well, this question of like the resurrection as a physical, historical event, that you're kind of missing the point. The thing that matters is like, the resurrection that takes place inside of every person.
Yeah.
It sort of sounds a little bit like the kind of approach that you would take. Now,
Yeah.
if that's true, that would mean that in the early church, you'd have been condemned as a heretic.
Yeah.
So when a modern Catholic says to you, Jordan Peterson, are you a Christian? What do you think about Catholicism? I think that the reason that they're interested is because if it's true what I'm saying, then they would have to say, oh, I suppose, at least according to my understanding of Catholicism,
That's a form of
I
Gnosticism.
can't count you among
Yeah,
my
right.
number.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
probably why people are interested. And I wonder if you agree.
What would you say? That would constitute a genuine form of inquiry for sure.
And I wonder if you feel like you're. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
See, one of the things I really like about the bodily tradition of the resurrection is that what it does that's so remarkable is that it doesn't desacralize the body. And that's very, very important. I think the fundamental problem with Gnosticism is that it's very easy for it to become a doctrine that's contemptuous of the body and contemptuous of the material world.
A great
right?
deal of the Gnostic tradition literally believes that the material world is created by an evil demigod.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, evil
exactly.
And Jesus comes to save us
the
from that.
insistence on the bodily resurrection is a medication against that.
Oh,
and it's an effective one.
I would really love to ask about Genesis. This might be a bit of a tangent, and tell me if it's uninteresting to you. But
Okay,
There's
that's the end of a segment here. Next they go into the testimony of truth. Was Christ the serpent in the garden, which is a whole nother Gnostic text. We'll finish watching this probably tomorrow. Another short stream tomorrow. The long streams with the Discord and all that will be Monday nights. I'll try to do little short streams like this, not every night, but so we're at 106. I gotta say it 14 times and I'll remember it. 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106, 106. I don't know if that was 14, but hopefully YouTube will just save where I left off at. So I don't have to remember that. But I gotta go. Tomorrow night we'll finish watching that, talking about that. Discord streams will be Monday and Tuesday nights now. We'll do the Monday Dreaded Conservative show as usual, and then I'll end that stream, and then we'll start a after party with the Discord and all that on Monday nights, and then Tuesday nights will be the snore streams where we just talk all night. And then throughout the week, if I'm doing these, Buff said, I bet you won't open the Discord. If I'm reviewing a video, and I'm talking about the video, I'm not going to open the Discord because we can't watch it together. If there was a way we could watch it and listen to it together, and then if somebody had a comment, I could pause it and we could talk, that would be fine. But it doesn't work when I'm listening to the video and the YouTube chat is watching the video, but then other people are just talking in the background because they can't hear the video or whatever. It doesn't work. And I'm not paying for StreamYards. So that's not going to happen. And I'm not using the free version of StreamYards because I don't like watermarks unless I make the watermark, like this one right here. I don't like having somebody's company logo unless they're paying me. Why should I pay you? You should pay me to have your watermark on my stream. Anyway, Get Lit Mondays. Ooh, I like that. Get Lit Mondays. That's pretty good. Yeah, we can't do fight nights anymore because I work on Saturdays. So Get Lit Mondays. It'll be the Dreaded Conservative show on Monday, then the after party, and then Tuesday will be the all night snore stream. And then throughout the week I'll do these. Now, if I'm doing a weeknight stream and I'm just like the other night I was just working on trying to understand this photo processing program, GIMP. Then I can open the Discord for that. But if I'm reviewing a video, I'm not going to open the Discord because we can't listen to it together and talk about it. It's like, yeah, it messes everything up. But that's the plan. It'll take a couple weeks to get into the groove of this new schedule, but we'll figure it out. But I got to go, guys. Thank you for hanging out. God bless everybody. Hit the like button on your way out. All the good stuff. Oh, it is Memorial Day weekend. Yeah, I'm still going to have to be working. But I'll see you guys later. God bless. Have a good night. Hit the like button. Hit up the Cash App. All the cool stuff. We out. Peace.